Hello, I'm Jeffrey Sachs. I'm Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, and also very lucky to serve as Special Advisor to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the Sustainable Development Goals. In that capacity, I also direct a global knowledge network called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN, that aims to help countries to achieve the new Sustainable Development Goals. It's in this capacity that I'm really deeply honored to be part of KDI's series on how Korea's remarkable economic development can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals worldwide, what we can learn from Korea's economic experience, its history, its efforts, its strategies, its organization and institutions, and how these can be important lessons for not only Korea's own future, but also for the developments in many other countries around the world. I have the pleasure in this chapter to talk about what is sustainable development and why is it important. This is a prelude to the whole question of how countries can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, sustainable development is a concept that has been with us now for more than a quarter century, almost 30 years, since it was really put in center stage by a commission in the mid-1980s headed by the Norwegian Prime Minister at the time, Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland. And the core idea of sustainable development was that we need to make sure that our economic development really meets human needs, not only for the people alive today, but also for future generations. And the big challenge that Dr. Brundtland and her commission faced when they issued their report back in 1987 is the fact that continues till today, that the way that economic growth is proceeding in the world poses some very deep challenges, even crises, environmental crises and social crises, that mean that even when economies are expanding, they're not necessarily meeting human needs or keeping the world safe and secure for future generations. So the idea of sustainable development was brought to the world's attention in Dr. Brundtland's commission report in 1987, and then it became a centerpiece of a very important meeting in 1992, the Rio Earth Summit. That was the time when the world first agreed on a climate treaty, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The world agreed on a treaty to protect biodiversity, the Convention on Biological Diversity. The world agreed to fight the spread of deserts or desertification in the UN Convention to combat desertification. All three treaties were adopted at the Rio Earth Summit, and they became the essence of sustainable development. But alas, that was 25 years ago, and we learned a painful lesson that having international law, having these treaties was not sufficient to actually put the world on a course of sustainable development. So on the 20th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit, which again took place in Rio in June 2012, the world's government said we really need to make sustainable development not just a slogan, but a reality for the world. And at that time, the government said we'll do that by adopting a new global agenda, a new development agenda, and we will include in that agenda Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Well, it took 3 years to negotiate that new agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. They were finally adopted on September 25th, 2015, unanimously by the 193 countries of the United Nations. It was really an exciting day. I was there. Ban Ki-moon was presiding. He had done so much to make this possible. And the world adopted the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, and it adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So what does sustainable development mean for us? The way that it is now interpreted by the member states of the United Nations is that sustainable development means having three big objectives for society. Economic prosperity, that one we're used to. Social fairness or social inclusion is the second big objective. And the third, environmental sustainability. So sometimes the Sustainable Development Agenda is defined as having a triple bottom line, an economic, a social, and environmental bottom line for society. Or to put it another way, that society has to aim for three things, not just the growth of the gross domestic product, but the prosperity, including economic growth, but also social inclusion or social fairness, so that everybody can share in those benefits of economic growth, and environmental sustainability, so that as the economy expands, it doesn't destroy the land, it doesn't poison the air and the water, it doesn't change the climate in dangerous ways. In other words, economic growth must be compatible with a safe environment, guarding against human-made climate change, guarding against the destruction of other species. So this triple bottom line, embodied in the 2030 Agenda, so-called, and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is now the world's globally agreed framework of cooperation. It is the strategy of all of the member states of the United Nations. It has a set period, 2016 to 2030, and one of the aspects that makes these Sustainable Development Goals so interesting and potentially so important is that these goals have timelines, milestones, and quantitative targets. We're supposed to reach certain outcomes by the year 2030. Now, Korea is a country that has a lot of experience with goal setting and achieving those goals and taking very big national objectives and then being successful at achieving them. And that's what makes it exciting to ask the question of how Korea's economic development history and experience can help inform the success of the Sustainable Development Goals. I do want to emphasize Korea has its own work to do. It's not the end of the story for Korea, though Korea is a high-income success story, admired around the world, a country that was impoverished, one of the poorest in the world a half century ago, and now is one of the richest in the world, a country that stands at the top of the charts in educational achievement, that is a highly competitive economy at the cutting edge of technology, in advanced information technology, in consumer electronics, in the mobile broadband, in the cutting edge sectors of the modern economy. Korea is there. But it doesn't mean that Korea is without its own challenges, because when you think about sustainable development, always think about the three pillars. Economic, I'd say Korea has done an absolutely spectacular job. Social, pretty good, but with some room to improve, because Korea is, broadly speaking, a country with shared prosperity. But there still are challenges in making sure that women are well represented in national life, at the top of the business circles. In politics, of course, you have a woman president, and we see advances, but there still is an indication that Korea has a gap of income distribution and gender inequalities and some of the other social challenges that I think are well known in the Korean context. But on the third pillar, environmental sustainability, this is a challenge for Korea, as it is for all of the high-income countries. Korea is a country, for example, that is heavily dependent on fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. And Korea's power generation is predominantly a fossil fuel-based power generation. That means that Korea is a major emitter of greenhouse gases that contribute to global climate change. This means that in order for Korea to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular SDG 13, which calls on every country to take actions to eliminate the greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to human-made climate change, Korea has a major work to do. Green growth as opposed to simply growth in the years ahead. So I believe firmly that Korea's development experience, which has been spectacular, is a basis for other countries to make significant advances in the Sustainable Development Goals. But I also believe that Korea's own development experience gives lessons for Korea as well on how Korea should achieve the SDGs in the period 2016 to 2030, because this is a universal challenge. It's a universal commitment. It's a challenge for Korea as well as the rest of the world.